I'd like to remind you that we have interpreters providing interpretation with us today, and today's presentation will be recorded. So now it is my pleasure to present the next speaker, Ms. Maryna Mykhailiuk. She's a PhD in History and Research Fellow at Khrushchevsky Institute of Ukrainian Archaeography and Source Studies. She's author of multiple scholarly articles. She is interested in World War II, Nazi occupation regime in Ukraine, Nazi propaganda, anti-Semitic propaganda, Holocaust, and the memory policy. Today, Maryna will talk about the tragedy of Babyn and the memories of Kyiv. Over to you, Maryna. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. I see so many colleagues from Lviv, from Kharkiv and Kyiv present here. Thank you for joining my presentation. Well, first, I would like to start with the pictures that Sarah can demonstrate. Now, I would like to briefly comment on them. Yes, we can see it. It's on our screen. Thank you so much, Sarah. Maryna, go ahead. Yes, could we please move to the first slide, please? This is a picture taken in 1941, if I'm not mistaken, because it seems to me, even though it says 1943 on the other side, most likely this is a mistake. Babyn is a place where the Jewish population in Kyiv was executed. Babyn covered a huge area from the modern memorial of 1967 all the way to Torohozhych metro station, and its depth was from 10 to 30 meters deep. Next picture, please. This is a picture of the Jewish cemetery. The picture taken in 1943. You can see the second gates leading to the Jewish cemetery. And they are covered in brick, but it is well known that many gates of the Jewish cemetery back then did not have any brick left there whatsoever, only had a wooden fence left. Also, further in the picture, you can see a brick building that has 2 floors. This building is there up to the present day, and there is a plan to turn it into a museum, but those plans are still in the limbo. So these are the second gates leading to the cemetery. Next to this 2-story building, another gate is available, and basically this is where the current entrance to the alley leads to the menorah memorial. Next one, please. This is the place where the Jews assembled. This monument was erected recently, or memorial, if I may, because this is where the Jews assembled in 1941. Next picture, please. This is a picture that shows how German security guards are going through the piles of items that belong to Jews. And we see the Wehrmacht uniform, and highly unlikely they're SS officers, even though some people say that. Next one, please. This is an announcement that says that all Jews should assemble on September 29, 1941. And they were posted around the city a day before that. They were in 3 languages: Ukrainian, Russian, and German languages. Next one, please. And this is a monument to the children who died in Babyn Yar. And by the way, this is where the Jews were shot, because this monument marks the starting point where the execution started. Next one, please. This is the map and the movement routes. We see Babyn Yar, and to the right from it, Kyiv Yar. Also, we can see all the cemeteries. They were located there. Also, Suret's concentration camp across from Babyn Yar. For example, if we look at the Orthodox cemetery, in 1991, menorah monument was erected, and it was discussed because this was a very hot topic back in the day. Also, aside from that, you can see a monument that was erected in 1976 in the vicinity of the Rohozhichi metro station. This is also area where people were executed. If we look at the part across the cemetery, people also executed there, as well as other parts where people were shot even before the tragedy of September 29, 1941. Especially many people were killed there on the 27th, 28th of September. We can see how people were going to Melnikov Street, then near the second gate that we have seen on the previous picture, they would turn to Verkhovska Street, and there in the vicinity of the monument that was erected in 1876, this is where the majority of people were executed. Also, we do not see the second route, but the second route went through the Jewish cemetery, also behind the Muslim cemetery. This is the area where people were also executed in the vicinity of the current location of the monument to the children. Next slide, please. Here we can see the Soviet prisoners of war. These are pictures taken by the Germans. They were taken by a member of Unit 3637 of the Wehrmacht. These are the pictures that were taken in early 1941 when Russian prisoners of war were burying the bodies of the executed Jews, and they were trying to cover that up. And Wehrmacht soldiers were overlooking them. That is why I don't know why Babyn Yar committee mentions them as the SS soldiers. Next one, please. Here you can see the picture that depicts how the Jews are walking through Kyiv streets on September 29, 1941. As you can tell, they are bringing all of their belongings with them because they didn't know that they would die soon. Next one, please. Here you can see a picture with the so-called storage of the belongings of the Jews in the vicinity of Babyn Yar. Even though their belongings were taken away from them before they came there. Next one, please. And here is a scheme of Babyn Yar dated 1941. That is located to the left from the Kyiv Yar. The menorah that is there, well, this is not Babyn Yar behind it. This is a territory of Kyiv Yar, even though many think that it is Babyn Yar. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah. And now I would like to proceed with my presentation. The topic of this research is not entirely new, as many Kyiv-based historians and local scholars have studied the memories of the city's residents. However, there remains a notable lack of publications that approach the subject through comparative analysis, particularly comparing the recollections and testimonies of both Jewish and non-Jewish Kyivans with official German documents from the period. That is why I decided to revisit most of the known legal sources and analyze them independently from the point of view of comparative studies and to draw my own conclusions. According to the 1939 Soviet Union census, the number of Jews in Kyiv was over 224,000. However, the exact number who remained in the city at the time of the Nazi occupation is unknown. Some families had left shortly beforehand or were evacuated. Those who stayed were mostly from the segments of the Jewish population. People either lacked the financial means to live or were unwilling to abandon the property they had acquired over years. According to German reports, there were estimated to be about 150,000 Jews in Kyiv, while memoirs of contemporaries suggest at least 70,000. On 19 September 1941, the Germans entered Kyiv. The next day, a series of mine explosions began in the city center, particularly on Khreshchatyk, and continued until 28th and 29th of September, causing a massive fire. All central streets were blocked off by German soldiers, and residents were forcibly evicted, primarily from the areas adjacent to Khreshchatyk. The water supply in the city center was cut off, forcing residents to fetch water from the Dnipro River. Members of the underground resistance cut the fire hoses, preventing the Germans from extinguishing the blaze, which infuriated them. The main fire lasted for 2 weeks, and the ruins continued to smolder until December 1941. The Germans blamed the Jews and communist activists for the bombing of the city center, and soon mass arrests began. And those arrested were either taken to Babyn Yar for execution or shot on the spot. It is known that by 27 September, 1,600 people had been arrested. In addition, the bodies of other murdered hostages lay in the streets of the city for several days, as evidenced by numerous German photographs and the memoirs of Kyiv residents. On September 28, 1941, the German command posted notices around the city and announced via mobile loudspeakers an order for all Jews in Kyiv and surrounding areas to gather at 8 a.m. in the Kyiv area, bringing warm clothes, valuables, and papers. The announcement contains spelling errors, as you already could see in the pictures, including a mistake in the name of Doktorivska Street, which was written as Doktorivska. This suggests that the notices were hastily handwritten by German translators who were neither particularly professional nor familiar with the area. Nevertheless, the Jews understood which streets were meant and began to gather at the corner of Melnikova and Doktorivska, present-day area of approximately Lvivska Square and the Lukyanivsky Market. These streets are located near the historic Babyn Yar ravine. By the way, the name Babyn Yar first appears in the documents from the 15th century, which during the German-Soviet War was situated on the outskirts of the city between what are now districts of Kornivka, Lukyanivka, and Syrets. Near the ravine were 2 Orthodox cemeteries, Lukyanivka and Kryvilivka. Notably, the modern menorah memorial now stands on the grounds of the former Kryvilivka cemetery, which was closed in 1929. The former Jewish cemetery, which was shut down along with the Karaite cemetery in 1962, now houses a TV center and a sport complex. The former 2-story cemetery office was intended to be converted into a state Holocaust museum, but as I've already mentioned, this plan remains unrealized. Also, located near Babyn Yar were the Muslim, Mohammedan, and Bratske, now military cemeteries. In fact, the modern city television tower stands on the site of the former Bratske cemetery. Additionally, the Lukyanivka freight station, which operated until the 1960s, was located in this area. According to Berlin reports on events in the USSR, number 101 and 106, dated 2nd and 7th October 1941, it is known that on 29th and 30th September, Einsatzgruppe C executed 33,771 Jews in Kyiv. The operation was carried out by the headquarters of the Einsatzgruppe Sonderkommando 4A and 2 units from the South Police Battalion. Paul Blobel himself did not confirm this number at the post-war Einsatzgruppe trial, instead citing roughly half as many victims. Maybe he was right saying that you had to kill 28 individuals per minute during a 10-day work day without breaks, which seems highly unlikely. According to Vitaly Nakhmanovich of the Kyiv History Museum, approximately 22,000 people were murdered on the first day and around 12,000 on the second one, although these numbers are not corroborated by existing German reports. Now, report number 106 also stated that the clothing of the murdered Jews was distributed to the Volksdeutsche ethnic Germans living in Ukraine through the National Socialist People's Welfare Organization, as well as to the local population via the Kyiv City Administration. However, the money and valuables mentioned in the report by Germans were not officially transferred. It is well documented that they were taken by SD officers involved in the executions. Furthermore, the highest quality clothing was seized by German guard soldiers and Ukrainian policemen who sorted it and transported it to warehouses. As a result, the Volksdeutsche and local Ukrainians likely received only the remnants. The report further claimed that the entire Jewish operation was welcomed by both the civilian population and the Wehrmacht. This is only partially true. Not all Kyiv residents, and certainly not all Wehrmacht soldiers, approved of or supported the extermination of Jewish population. Additionally, the document stated that the population was unaware of the so-called resettlement, which in fact was a mass education of the Jews. Yet this too was inaccurate. By the afternoon of 29th of September, many people in Kyiv had already realized that the Jews were being executed, not deported. Following the initial mass killings, Jews who had fled or were hiding were gradually discovered and subjected to the same fate, same as those who came to Babyn Yar. So, while German reports suggest the mass executions at Babyn Yar occurred only over 2 days in late September 1941, the testimonies of Kyiv residents, as well as those of former SS officers and soldiers, make it clear that the killings continued well beyond that time frame. Let us now turn to the memories of Kyiv residents, because in this research, I didn't look at the German memories. I have systemized and analyzed the accounts of 39 individuals, though many more exist, both of Jewish and non-Jewish origin, Ukrainians and Russians. The selection excludes memoirs and testimonies of collaborators who served in the occupation authorities, such as officials and policemen. These personal stories are scattered across various sources, including electronic and printed, and appear on websites of public and private institutions dedicated to the study of Holocaust and Babyn Yar history. And all of them are available. You can find them online.
All known memoirs of the shootings of Jews can be divided into three groups: those of Jews, those of individuals of mixed Jewish and non-Jewish heritage from mixed marriages, and those of the non-Jewish population of Kyiv. These accounts vary in informational value. While some provide overlapping details, others contain contradictions. However, in most cases, they serve to complement one another by offering unique perspectives and additional context. Jewish memoirs can be divided into three categories. The first includes individuals who were taken to Babyn Yar, survived an execution attempt, and lived to tell their story. The second comprises those who were en route but managed to escape before reaching the site or fled during the executions. And third includes those who avoided the gatherings altogether and went into hiding in Kiev and surrounding regions. The most significant in the context of this research are the memoirs of Jews who personally experienced the shootings but managed to survive the liquidation campaign. Such accounts are extremely rare. They primarily include the testimonies of young women Dina Pranicheva, Raisa Dashkevich, and Elena Knish. At the time of massacre, all of them were under 30 years old. For instance, Raisa Dashkevich was just 16 or 17. Dina Pranichev, a native of Chernihiv, had a Russian husband and two young children, aged 3 years and a half and 1 year and a half. At the time of the Nazi occupation, she had two children and a Russian husband. Before the war, she worked as a puppet theater in Kiev. She survived the shooting at Babyn Yar. Pranicheva gave her testimony multiple times at the Kyiv trial, the Nuremberg trial, and the NKVD and the KGB in 1946 and 1967, as well to the writer Anatoly Kuznetsov and numerous journalists. Olena Knish testified to the NKVD in 1944, starting that her Ukrainian husband had gone to fight in the army and she remained at home with her 4-year-old daughter. The stories of these three women can be divided into several parts. The first concerns the appearance of announcement instructing Jews to gather at a specific location and the reaction of Jewish community to these notices. The second part describes the movement of Jews through the streets of Kyiv toward Babyn Yar. And the third focuses on the process of confiscating their belongings, forcing them to undress, and the execution itself. The final part recounts their escape from Babyn Yar and their survival during the Nazi occupation. As mm, a separate group of memoirs includes the testimonies of Jews who escaped from Babyn Yar, those who didn't go to the gathering point, didn't reach the place of execution, or managed to flee from the execution site itself. These accounts include the testimonies of women Olena Hordecka, Rebecca Schwartzman, or Raisa Kisilova, Hanna Batasheva, Doba Bilozovska, Isabella Mirkina-Ivorcheva, and Lev Pinzonsevsky and Yakov Ekel. Their memoirs can be divided in several parts. Some cover the reasons for leaving the city, and some tell us about the appearance of German announcements and the reactions of Jews to this news. Uh, and some the second group of memoirs also cover the half-Jews, those from marriages who survived the occupation in Kiev. And these accounts describe the first days of the city's occupation, gatherings of Jews, their fate, and the methods of survival in harsh conditions of the occupation. The memoirs also recount the hiding of half-Jews by their relatives, as they too were at risk of extermination, particularly from 1942. The largest number of memoirs come from the non-Jewish population of Kyiv, Ukrainians and Russians, particularly those who lived near the gathering and execution site at Babyn Yar in the districts of Lukyanivka, Kurenivka, and Surets. We worked on 19 testimonies of this kind, but there are more of them. The memoirs of the non-Jewish population differ from those of Jews and half-Jews in that they are especially marked by pre-war attitudes toward Jewish neighbors, which influenced their actions and survival during the occupation. The stories of non-Jews can be divided into several parts. Reasons for staying in the city, the arrival of the Germans, the fire on Krещатик, the posting of announcements about the gathering in the Babyn Yar area, and the reaction of the population to these notices. The day of the gathering itself, the information about the shooting, and the number of victims, and the assistance to fleeing Jews. Let us now analyze each group separately. The first group of testimonies from Jews who survived the shootings at the Babyn Yar. From the accounts of Dina Pranicheva, Raisa Dashkevich, and Elena Knish, we gain insight into how the liquidation action was organized and planned, how it was carried out, and who among the Germans and their support staff were involved, and how the survivors managed to escape. For example, while Dina Pranicheva and Lev Pensovetsky described the movement of the convoy through the Jewish cemetery heading towards the eastern part of the ravine, near the area of modern monument of the executed children. The convoys with Zhenya Batashova and Yakov Ekel followed a different route, passing along the Lukyanivka Orthodox and military cemeteries. This suggests that the execution site was spread across a larger area of Babyn Yar, and I think that we may put an end to the debates among historians about the exact location of the execution. In addition, the memories of Jews regarding the location where the luggage was unloaded vary. According to Zhenya Batashova and Yakov Ekel, it took place near the Jewish cemetery. Other testimonies suggest that the luggage was taken from the Jews at the collection point on Melikova Street, with the convoys proceeding without their personal belongings. However, well-known German photographs indicate that some of the luggage was taken on Kahatna Street, next to the military cemetery. The discrepancy likely arose because there was insufficient space at the Jewish cemetery to store and sort belongings of those arriving in the morning. As a result, the convoys that arrived later had their luggage taken immediately after they passed through the German cordon. A diagram from the electronic publication Babyn shows the first checkpoint behind an anti-tank ditch near the corner of Melnikova and Rohozhitska streets, though testimony suggests that German patrols were present much earlier. The memories of half-Jewish individuals from mixed marriages generally mm, do not differ much from those of Jews who gathered in the Babyn but miraculously escaped and survived. These accounts confirm that many Jews still hope to leave Kiev and did not fully understand the tragic fate that had awaited them. Jewish women often left their children with non-Jewish relatives before heading to the assembly point. For instance, Sergei Tauchnatsky noted that Jews were driven into groups from Melnikov Street to Babyn Yar, which was entirely cordoned off. Raisa Maestranka contributed details about the events in the Irvine itself, emphasizing that families were separated, men and teenage boys from women with small children, a detail not commonly mentioned in other EU documents of Holocaust victims. In most cases, neighbors didn't attempt to betray half Jewish children to the occupation authorities in the exchange for reward. On the contrary, many were aware that children were hiding and chose to remain silent, helping them to survive. This demonstrates that despite the immense challenges of survival faced by the non-Jewish population in a hungry and freezing Kiev, not all Ukrainians or Russian neighbors succumbed to the lure of easy money, and though through extra food rations or monetary compensation. The testimonies of non-Jewish population of Kiev regarding the appearance of announcements and public reaction to them consistently state that people personally saw these notices and posters displayed throughout the city, and some also heard the orders broadcast over loudspeakers. There is general agreement that this occurred on the 28th of September 1941, as the Jews were ordered to assemble to following on the following day in Babyn Yar area near cemetery. All testimonies indicate that the general public believed that the Jews were to be deported from the city and resettled elsewhere. And um, uh, they were, in fact, instructed to bring food, warm clothes, documents, and valuables, suggesting preparation for a long journey. That is why they had a lot of possessions with them, as you can see on the photo. There were various interpretations of the reasons behind the deportation. Some believed it was a punishment for alleged Jewish sabotage during the recent explosions and fires in the city center, or retaliation for Jews' perceived support of the Soviet regime. Others showed little concern for the fate of the Jewish population. However, none of the witnesses imagined that the Jews were being gathered for mass execution. Only one testimony suggests that the Jews themselves were aware of the impending death and reportedly spent the entire night in prayer. Another significant theme in the recollections of Kyiv's non-Jewish residents concerns the events of the 29th and 30th of September. On those days, people observed Jews walking or running toward Babyn Yar in early morning hours and died there. Thus, based on the published testimonies of Anatoly Kuznetsov, Irina Horoshunova, Fedor Behido Preobrazhny, Sofia Yarova, Olga Roshchenko, Nadia Homena, Vladimir Stepanuk, Pelagia Klepko, Anatoly Yevgeniev, Nadila Linka, Irina Chernakova, Yuri Husensky, and Vladimir Nishchuk, certain generalizations can be made regarding the mass murder of Jews and the public reaction to this event. All of the witnesses, without exception, remembered it as an act of unprecedented cruelty that left a deep and lasting impression. The poor Jewish population remained in Kiev. And therefore, summarizing, we may say the following that the poor Jewish population remained in Kiev as those who had the means and the desire to leave had evacuated prior to the occupation. Attitude among the non-Jewish population toward Jews varied. Some held anti-Semitic views, while others were tolerant, loyal, or even friendly. Non-Jewish residents of Kiev were unaware of the mass shootings. Most believed that the Jews were being deported either to Palestine or concentration camps. Once the truth came out, public opinion was divided. Some saw the German actions as justified retaliation, others were horrified and condemned them, while all were shocked by the scale and brutality of execution. Some Jews committed suicide either on the eve of the action or on the day of the gathering. All memoirs reference the method of execution Babyn Yar on the edge of a cliff with machine gun rifles, where people were shot and fell into the ravine. However, this account contradicts the established execution methodology of Secondary Commander 4A of Einsatzgruppe C and the police battalions under the command of the SS and police leadership of Army Group South. According to post-war testimonies of German participants in Kiev executions, victims in reality were shot using the so-called sardine method. They were led into the ravine. They were made to lie face down, either directly on the ground or atop of the bodies of those already shot, and then they were killed by a shot to the back of the head. Jews were executed either in their underwear or completely naked, so there is a discrepancy in this. It is assumed that initially adults were stripped fully before being shot, but due to time constraints, the process was expedited by executing them in their underwear. Full undressing to maintain the pace of the operation. They were bodies were further incinerated either half naked or naked. Infants were not shot, and instead they were thrown into the ravine alive. Similarly, the wounded were buried alive to avoid using additional ammunition. Numerous witnesses later recalled that the ground continued to move for some time after the execution. And those who were injured were shot additionally, but and this information was not supported by all the witness accounts. Half Jewish children were not affected by the action. They were not invited to Babyn Yar. And in other occupied territories, including Crimea, children of mixed Jewish origin were also subject to execution alongside adults. This specific characteristic of the Kiev action is particularly striking, yet remains unexplained. Although the Germans got uniform orders from Berlin, they acted differently depending on the territory. In addition to shootings, rumors circulated that the Germans also used electrocution during the execution. These claims are likely unfounded, as the Babyn Yar ravine was not enclosed by electrified fencing. The site was only cordoned off and guarded by German patrols. In contrast, the nearby Suez concentration camp, established in the spring of 1942, was equipped with electrified fencing, and you can see it on the slide. According to the testimonies of Jewish survivors Zina Pranicheva and Zhenya Batashova, a barbed wire fence reinforced with anti-tank obstacles was installed near the entrance to the Jewish cemetery and along Lahyurna Street, now the Rohozhetska Street, specifically between the Lukyanivka and the Bratska cemeteries. The clothing of executed Jews was transported by truck into the city. Only garments deemed usable were collected. The rest was buried on site or incinerated. Before execution, Jews were stripped off of their personal belongings, which were typically burned immediately, but not everything was destroyed. Some was appropriated by members of SD, police, and other collaborators. According to the testimonies of the non-Jewish population of Kyiv, Ukrainian policemen didn't participate in the action. However, there are testimonies from the Jews saying that they participated in mass executions and they were taking some personal belongings of Jews as well as the German guards did. The executions of Jews at Babyn Yar continued after the mass action of September 29, 30, and 1941, as many witnesses reported seeing Jews being transported by truck or brought on foot to the execution site in early October. Most witnesses only saw the procession of Jews towards the Babyn Yar area, and they might have seen the confiscation of their clothing and document. They didn't see it with their own eyes, as this territory was guarded by Germans and it was restricted access area. They could only hear the machine guns fired, firing at Babyn Yar. Particularly those who were working close by, they could hear that, and some people who lived or worked nearby witnessed the events by hiding in the bushes, trees, or house attics. Mostly children or teenagers who were driven by curiosity to witness the event. German officers occasionally released Jewish teenagers who, in order to escape, posed as members of other ethnic groups, Ukrainians and Russians, and didn't have and those teenagers usually didn't have pronounced Semitic features. This is confirmed by multiple testimonies. The memories of Ukrainians and Russians are particularly valuable. For instance, the testimony Natalia Tkachenko closely mirrors that of Ludmila Grigorno, differing only in its additional details about the transportation of Jews who didn't appear at the designated gathering point. Both women mention a period of mass execution lasting between 7 to 9 days. This witness, along with Natalia Petrenko, date the initial gathering of Jews to 24th September, not 29th. But that is a mistake. Well, we have three women who state the same date. Well, I have a lot of questions to these testimonies.
Ivan Yanuich's testimony in particular aligns with the accounts of Jews who were led through the Lukyanivka cemetery, different mainly in the details of where personal belongings were confiscated, either before entering the cemetery or within its grounds, and in the description of whether the Jews were marched to their deaths in their underwear or completely naked. Additionally, his testimony matches Dokia Homena's recollections regarding the alleged use of electric shocks, though these claims remain highly questionable. He also notes that the mass executions of Jews continued for more than a week, which is consistent with other testimonies. According to Maria Lutsenko, the mass executions of civilian Jews lasted 3 days, from 28 to 30 September. Or this seems to be incorrect. If we consider the period of span of 3 days, it should be from 29th of September to the 1st of October 1941, which is supported by Dina Pronicheva's testimony. Around October 2, Pronicheva recorded seeing Jews locked in garages opposite the Jewish cemetery, likely in the garages of the tank repair facility at the corner of Melnikova and Lahyurna Street, awaiting execution. Madeleine Stepanik also mentioned 3 days of mass executions. However, other witnesses claimed that the executions at Babyn Yar continued until October 4, 1941. Thus, the following memoirs of the mass executions of civilians in the Babyn Yar tracts emerges which partially coincide with German official reports and post-war testimonies of German soldiers. And the execution at Babyn Yar most likely began on September 24, with Jewish families and men arrested from preliminary lists or as hostages or saboteurs. These individuals were brought to the ravine by truck, possibly from the Zenit Stadium, now Start, or from the camp on Kerosina Street, now Shuludenko Street, where thousands of prisoners of war and civilians were held. However, according to Vitaly Nakhmanovich, for example, the first mass executions in Babyn Yar began on September 27, which aligns with German reports, and continued at least until the end of October or even mid-November 1941. The execution of Jews who arrived at the ravine on foot in columns on September 29 did not last for 2 days, but extended at least until October 2, 4 days in total. On the 1st and 2nd of October, those who had been kept in the garages of the former tank repair facility were executed, and therefore the German reports would describe the mass shootings as lasting only 2 days, provide only an intermediate figure for the Jewish losses, not the final tally of the grand action. On 3rd and 4th October 1941, the Germans brought to Babyn Yar by truck or wagon Jews who had not yet been arrested or had failed to appear for the forced gatherings, as well as those held in temporary camps. Thus, it appears that the most massive executions of Jewish civilians in September and October continued almost daily for at least 11 days, from September 24 to October 4, 1941. A timeline confirmed by numerous memoirs of non-Jewish Kyiv residents, though not by German reports. Also, and during this period, Jewish prisoners of war, arrested Soviet activists, communists, and members of underground movements were also brought to Babyn Yar for execution. As a result, people living near the ravine heard the gunfire for an extended period. Afterward, the German cordon around the ravine was lifted, and the bodies of the executed were seen covered in dust. In general, liquidation actions in Babyn Yar continued throughout the occupation, lasting until the end of October and early November 1943. In addition, the opinion of witnesses regarding the number of Jewish victims in Kyiv are quite varied. Some pointed to the September victims, others to those killed in September and October, while others referred to the total number of victims during occupation. Ukrainian Maryna testified that between 28 September and 1st of October, around 50,000 Jews were shot at Babyn Yar. This aligns with German documents that mention 50,000 Jews to be executed out of the 150,000 who allegedly remained in Kyiv and did not evacuate, as well as the testimony of some Soviet camp prisoners who dug up and burned bodies in August, September 1943. They reported finding 45 to 50,000 corpses, but this figure refers to the entire period of occupation and includes victims other than Jews. Maria Lutsenko's testimony, however, indicates that 57,000 were killed during the 3 days of September. Fedor Pravobережny's memoirs mention rumors of 67 to 70,000 victims. According to Anatoly Kuznetsov and Polina Savitsky, the number of Jews executed was 70,000. However, Natalia Tkachenko suggests that this number refers the entire duration of the occupation. In general, testimonies from those involved in the implementation of Sonderkommando 1005 indicate that up to 120 to 125,000 bodies were dug up and burned at Babyn Yar, though the precise number of civilian Jewish victims remains unclear. Some modern historians, based on witness testimonies, estimate that between 40 and 70,000 Jews died at Babyn Yar, but this figure is approximate rather than definitive. Thank you so much for your attention. This ends my presentation. Thank you so much, Maryna, for such an important and at the same time tragical research. It is important for us to be well aware of these sad pages of Ukrainian history. Now we have the Q&A time. Tatiana, to you. Maryna, thank you so much for incredibly interesting presentation, for your research, for these terrible statistics that you once again made us aware of. We have to remember about that so that it does not repeat again. I have a few questions because this is an incredible presentation. First, if I understood you correct, you said that there were certain methods of shooting Jews. So basically, the Germans came up with something and of these methods, for example, shooting them from the back, or when the bodies were layered on top one another. That is why my first question is why? Why do survivors not mention these methods in their memoirs? And my second question, do you also look at the memories of the Jews who were living in other parts of Ukraine? Because, you know, your presentation reminded me of the movie Carol of the Bells that also mentions how the Jews were killed in Ivano-Frankivsk Oblast, because that's where I come from. So I looked into that movie too. So my question is, do you also look into the memories of residents of other parts of Ukraine? And were the execution methods in Babyn Yar different from execution methods in other parts of Ukraine? And question number 3. There are lots of video materials dedicated to Babyn Yar. Haven't you thought about taking the results of your research and maybe turn it into a video, maybe some kind of a film, you know, something cinematographic, so that new generations can also find out more about it. Thank you once again. It was very interesting. Thank you for such good questions. Well, regarding the video, I am not a public person, and I am not interviewed. I am only doing research in academia. And unlike many other Kyiv historians, I do not speak publicly that often. For example, Vitaly Nakhmanovich and Anatoly Podolsky usually are the type of people to speak publicly. Now, regarding your question, whether the execution ways different, you know, I also looked at other territories and regions. I wouldn't say that approach to execution would be different because Einsatzgruppen and police battalions, they basically acted in the same way all across Ukraine. I have managed to process very few memories because I looked at Babyn Yar. That is why I am now processing all of those memories. And I'm trying to also do the comparative analysis. Now, let us move next to your other question. Why are memories different by the Jews and non-Jews when it comes to how people are executed? Because the Jews saw it, because they managed to survive. For example, Dina Pronycheva eyewitnessed everything. Olena Knish also eyewitnessed it. Non-Jewish people did not see. They could hear it. They could hear the rifles. They could hear machine guns. They could hear guns. You name it, but they didn't see it. And they could not see it because the territory was surrounded. There were a few cordons there that were surrounded by the SS officers, not Wehrmacht. And non-Jewish people would not be able to enter that territory, and they could not eyewitness that. And that is why memories are different, unfortunately, not consistent. Thank you. Thank you. Any more questions? Please join us. Maybe somebody else has some questions or comments. Nadia, go ahead. Nadia, go ahead. Sorry, something happened with my device. Thank you so much, Maryna. for such a systemic presentation. I have a question that has to do with memories and with their inconsistency. When I was reading a book edited by Renevich Babyn History and Memory that I think saw the world in 2023, if I'm not mistaken. It always covers an article by a well-known scholar about how to work with memories. And this article basically covers the memories of Babyn Yar. And the author mentions that people describe Kyiv before the execution in a different way, the routes in a different way. But she, I believe, did not have this breakdown into the groups. But it's good that you did it. And she says that people are recollecting it in a different way because it allows you to see a more complex picture of what was happening at Babyn Yar. And that even these discrepancies are not a key. If we want to see this comprehensive picture, and if it is important for us to approach it in an ethical way, to hear the witnesses, to hear the survivors, to understand what happened there. What is your take on this approach about this various memories? Does it help us to see the complex picture, or does it confuse us more? Because given the different data that you mentioned, it looks like it's making things more complicated. Well, I agree with you when it comes to the statement that it does make it harder to comprehend, because we have reports by the Germans. By the reports that on September 29 and 33,771 Jews were executed. But as I have already mentioned before that, I did my math and I realized that it was impossible. Of course, if you're just not using machine guns for 10 hours without stopping for a second, and you're killing people for 2 days in a row nonstop. Of course, these memories are not consistent because, well, let's take what Vitaly Nakhmanovich says. He has a very critical approach. He believes that there is a lot of non-truth. But I think that people who lived in the vicinity of Babyn Yar, who saw how people were brought there by the truck starting September 24, 1941, maybe they have a point. Maybe they are right. Of course, this was not happening en masse. We're talking about executions of a few dozens of people, but nevertheless, that happened. People saw this and people testified about it. Of course, the Jews that were not arrested before September 28, they are not aware of that because there was no hearsay about it. Only people who lived in the vicinity of Babyn Yar knew about that. In the vicinity of Koronivka, Surets, and Lukyanivka, while people from other adjacent areas could probably hear something, there maybe was some word of mouth, but people did not know anything for sure. Now, talking about the memories of the Jews when it comes to this day. On September 29, they assembled because they saw announcements posted across the city and they walked by foot. They were not brought there by force. And this was the biggest action, but not the first and not the last Babyn Yar saw. And it is important to talk about that. For example, the German reports mention that the first executions started on September 20, so the next day after occupation. Other reports mention September 22. The witnesses mention September 24. So, of course, German reports and testimonies are inconsistent, and clearly it adds up to the amount of effort that you have to contribute while working on that. I actually want to write a large article dedicated to that because I believe that we have not yet properly researched this topic. There are very few people who are trying to truly professionally look at it, at least in Kyiv. Thank you so much. Thank you, Maryna. Thank you, Nadia. And we have time for one more question. So, Yevhen, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for your presentation. Can you hear me? Unfortunately, I cannot hear you, Yevhen. Yevhen, unfortunately, I cannot hear you at all. Yevhen, maybe you should try and then, or maybe you could write your question, send it to the chat box, and then I'll be able to read it. How about now? Ladies and gentlemen, Natalia shared a LinkedIn article in case you would like to look at the research about how Ukrainian policemen were engaged in executions in Babyn Yar, and also more comments about a video, some kind of educational video materials. Well, unfortunately, I don't have anything like that. And talking about the Ukrainian policeman, yes, the articles, Vitaly Nakhmanovich covered that. And also, recently, thesis was defended at Kyiv Mohyla Academy by Natalia Schlicht, PhD student, about the activities of the Ukrainian police officers. Everyone in Kyiv is well aware of that. We are studying that. We're looking into that. And many people who are working on the topic of Holocaust clearly are aware of that. And one more comment, you can also see it in the chat box. One more comment about the following testimonies probably can contribute less to reconstruction of the historical events because we cannot be 100% sure of them. But the narration is important because sometimes people also omit some things. Yes, thank you so much for that comment. And Yevhen also posted a comment in the chat box. Do you believe that testimony and memories are two different genres? 39 memories. Is that a lot or is that little? Can we talk about this sample being representative? Well, of course, 39 is not a small number because there are not that many people who survived. Who managed to climb out of the pit and survive. That is why I believe that 39 memoirs is not a bad sample. I think it is pretty reliable. We're not talking about one, two, three individuals that are remembering something. I tried to pick the memoirs of people that were almost executed but survived, those people who I witnessed what happened in Babyn Yar. I didn't take into account the memoirs of the Jews who heard some hearsay or those mixed Jews who survived during occupation or non-Jews who heard something from their neighbors, etc. These are exclusively memories of those people who saw something with their own eyes. That is why I believe that we can rely on their memories. And regarding the lady who witnessed during the Kyiv process, are you talking about Dina Pronicheva, I assume? Well, I read her memoirs and different interpretations, and they're pretty consistent. The only inconsistency would be a few details, but aside from that, she was pretty much talking about the same thing. So I would call them very consistent. Amazing. And basically, our seminars exist to create this intellectual community where you can chat with one another, ladies and gentlemen. So please stay in touch after the seminars, maybe work on some projects together because that will be amazing. Now, I would like to thank our presenters today. Thank you for your amazing lectures, for such very much needed research, for everything that you do for Ukraine. Thank you so very much. Glory to Ukraine. Take care, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for joining us today. I'd like to thank our interpreters, Yana and Anastasia, as well as all universities and our colleagues from Big Ten Alliance. And thank you all, each and every one of you. And see you on 30 June, our English language seminar. Thank you, Svetlana. Thank you and your colleagues for all your help and assistance during organizing the seminar. Thank you so much. Impressive presentations. Thank you so very much. Thank you. Thank you from me as well. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye. All the best. And on.